So many challenges to doing that, that of course originally I didn't want to do it at all, but in the end economics wins out and producers ram your arm up behind your back and say, listen, if you play this part we don't have to pay you immediately. And that helps the sums to add up to actually get to the start line. So it's not even as if you have the opportunity to consider what the challenges are. The only thing that made it in any way doable for me was he's not in it that much. And that in a way, playing Louis XIV, I think he's like, somewhere in his psyche is a film director waiting for the movies to happen, because he's sort of standing there looking back at the whole operation and saying left a bit, right a bit, up a bit. And I suppose as I've discovered over the years, acting for the camera and acting on stage are basically the same activity. You learn on camera as an actor to keep your head still in a close-up, which is probably something I'm ruining right now. So in many ways it's the same job, and in many ways actually the challenges on film are less, because you've got so much more of a support system. You're surrounded by people who know what they're doing and are only there to help you. Of course, you've also got pigeons in your ears talking about budget and time. So in the end, especially with a film that's set in 1682 in France, and you're shooting it in England, which is a very thin country, and so you're never more than 25 miles from a motorway, or if the wind changes, you've got a flight path coming over your head, so suddenly the word cut is happening all the time. Yeah, I suppose all those words that you've mentioned, if you kind of threw a lasso around them, you'd come up with human and true and timeless. And so in a way, the whole period nature of it wasn't an irrelevance, because of course it's a framework, but certainly when you or members of the audience watch it, I kind of hope that you'll all forget about the period and see all sorts of modern parallels. The script arrived, 180 pages of it, written by Alison Deegan. She's taken a period where women were merely decorative objects. They had no function. So Kate Winslet's character in the film is an invention. Of course, there could never have been a woman with a job. And it's sad that the situation still persists. You still have women as decorative objects all over the... Well, there's nothing wrong with a man being a feminist. I think it's to our mutual advantage. And I think that one of the great things about the writing means that Matthias's character is allowed, if you like, to show his, quotes, feminine side, and Kate's character is allowed to show her, quotes, masculine side, and neither of them, as actors, are afraid of that. And I think that creates a great sexual tension between the two of them. There's a level of silence in an audience sometimes, and you can feel it as an actor. And certainly there have been times when the screening of this film when you know that the energy at work from the actors and all the technicians that I've talked about, and especially the writer, mean that you've got a captive audience sitting in the dark being told a story. This is a very ancient and wonderful thing, and it's terrible if we lose this. As times change and everybody sits at home with their huge screen and their 5 seats and their surround sound, and they don't actually go out and sit together with a huge bunch of other people on a kind of once upon a time level. And I do feel that tangibly, that thank you, Kate, because she's so committed and so inside the story. So you really watch her learning about herself. You can almost touch her thought processes in the film. And so therefore you can feel audiences getting genuinely involved in it and sitting very, very quietly. and being completely inside the story. So that's hugely satisfying, when that happens. It's a very weird thing it's a bit like a kind of microcosm of what I've just talked about, because on the film set you may have a scene between two people, but there's probably about 30 or 40 people with clipboards all around it. Everybody kind of knows. There's a common concentration happens, and thank God the plane didn't fly over or the sound man didn't come out from behind his bush saying sorry. Absolutely. I think that's, of course, the magic of the editing room, because not only am I spending hours watching, and it's what I was saying about Kate before, and Matthias too. You've got two characters who have to learn who they are on screen. So therefore, all the takes of them listening rather than talking become gold dust, and they have to be part of the movie. And then, of course, you've got this bigger thing in the editing room, which is where the film itself asserts itself. And it starts to say, yeah, you thought you knew what this film was about, or what I'm about, the movie was about. But actually, how about going down this road? So you have to be very awake to that, added to the fact that you've got somebody called the editor with a very strong point of view in there. My editor, Nick Gaster, he said right at the beginning, he said, well, I just have to warn you, this is like a marriage with all its ups and downs, and he's right. Well, if you're loved and cherished by your family, then that's kind of all you remember. You don't particularly remember deprivation, because your hard-working parents are fighting hard to put food on the table, and so you don't have any memory of being hungry or cold, because they've worked hard to prevent that. Well, I mean, specifically when I was 8, my father died, so that was very measurably a time when we knew things were difficult, because, my mother had to go out to work to feed us. So we were all brought up knowing how to make a fire and knowing how to iron a shirt. But that was our reality. But she was, I suppose, going back to the story of the film, she was a tigress. She could do anything. She could sew, all those female things like sew, cook and clean. She took care of those without even thinking about it, because she'd been trained by her mother. It's a very Welsh thing, that side of my family, and families knit together. So a bit like a film crew came into operation, aunts and uncles, and huge support system. When I was at, we called it infant school, so primary school or whatever the title is you have for it. So I guess I was about 7. For whatever reason, I was given the title role in it. See how amazing that it sticks in your mind. The title role in a play called King Grizzlybeard. And I remember my mother cutting out a triangle out of a carpet, and that was stuck on my chin. But it was the first time I'd felt, I don't know whether it's about feeling the power you can have as an actor, but it goes back to what I was saying about that silence. You're involved in a story, and then there's a load of people in front of you, and they've gone really quiet. And you think, when they're not asleep. I went to a school where I had to get a scholarship to get into it, but it was a fantastic school, and remains a fantastic school, because it doesn't limit you. It's now co-educational. In fact, when I went there, it was all boys. And it had a huge, and I think still does, have a huge drama tradition. But when I was at that school, which would be 11 to 18, I was also very involved in the art department. And because it was a very high-achieving academic school, the idea of going to drama school didn't really enter my head at all. It was a question when I was 18 of whether I would go to university and read English or go to art school. And I went to art school, but still with this thing drilling away in my brain about acting. Whatever piece of my brain is missing, I don't know, it's never ever thought that way about, future income, never really entered my head. No, all I really remember from that time is exactly where the letterbox was in London, where I posted that letter saying, please can I have a form for auditioning? And I absolutely remember posting it. You get the costumes and then you sort them out and help the actor if there's something difficult to button up or something that's got to be fastened behind in the dressing room. And then if they've got changes, down to the wings with the quick change costume, and they're standing there ready in the dark with the shirt and helping them in out of one costume and into the next. I don't know what the word would be, whether it's hungry. It's a bit like being a child standing in the dark in the wings. And as it happens, in that production, which was a play by John Osborne called West of Seward, was Sir Ralph Richardson, truly one of the greatest. I knew I wanted to do it, and now you're watching one of the greatest actors that ever lived, and you're in the wings, in the dark, and he's on stage. And then, as it happened, he was also on stage with Nigel Hawthorne, and a few years down the line, I ended up working with Nigel Hawthorne. So then you learn that the theatre throws these sort of things at you. You know, you can be, and even more so now when there's, you know, no real repertory system anymore in England. Somebody can come out of drama school at 20-something or other and be working opposite Judi Dench or whoever the next day or the next week. So you've got to be ready for that. But don't be arrogant about it either, because these people really know what they're doing. I did talk to her because I said to the producers when I was asked to play it, because you have to remember that only 3 books had been written when we started filming them. And I said, I have to talk to her because I don't know how to play this part, because it seems to be travelling potentially down 2 avenues at the same time. And so they arranged for us to speak, and I got put through to her on the phone. She was with her sister at the time, and she said, I can't talk now. So that's how close she held everything to herself. And so we arranged to speak the next day when she was on her own. And then she gave me one very small piece of information, which I always have vowed I would never, ever repeat, even though the books are now done and everything. So I won't repeat it. It wasn't a fact. It was just a kind of clue that there's something that meant it was possible for me to think he was other than. Even that she said that, it was just made him a little, there was something more human.
Tell me, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? You don't know? Pity. Clearly, fame isn't everything, is it, Mr. Potter?
Well, I think it goes back to what we've already been talking about a bit, which is that it means they believed it. They've not been manipulated. I think it is possible, clearly, to manipulate people into an emotional response. I wouldn't be very content with being part of that. You know, people still love that film. In fact, it gets used for grief therapy, apparently, to help people to get through that period if it happens to them. It's something to do with the fact that Anthony Minghella was directing something that he'd written. It's beautifully written. It has something to do with the fact that Juliet Stevenson and I had worked a lot together in the theatre, so there's a lot of knowledge of each other in the room and trust. So, you know that it's possible to try things that are going to fail. You know that it's possible to try things that aren't going to be necessarily attractive. I mean, I'm not sure if too many actresses would allow the snot to pour out of their nose the way she does, and has to be offered a Kleenex on such a regular basis when she's sobbing herself in the film.
But do
Yeah,
you?
I watch it and I go, you know what? We weren't mucking about. We were doing it properly. Of course, yeah, because you know you're not wasting your time, and I do believe I, as an actor, I'm pretty involved in quite a lot of political causes, one way and another. Like Emma, I don't parade my opinion about young actors particularly, or social media. I think a lot of that is the stuff of life, and it's an evolving thing. But no, I'm pretty militant in certain other areas. I think that you learn as time goes on that it goes back to what you want people's response to be to your work, and if it's called privacy and guarding it, it means I want people to believe that I'm the person in the story. I don't want them to be thinking about something or other I've said in the newspaper when they're watching me. You know, for example, playing Eamon de Valera in Michael Collins, or Ronald Reagan, for that matter, I want them to believe that and only think about that. Well, yes and no would be the answer to that.
Why
you
no?
know. Because, like most actors, I don't enjoy watching myself because all you see is what you've got wrong. Actually, you know, one of your great actresses, Kate Blanchett, said at some point, the point about a horizon is that you look at it and you move towards it and it only gets further away. You never actually get there. And, you know, one has so many examples of people like Judi Dench at 80, still hungry, to use your word, and still wanting to be working. Well, you have to hold your finger up to the wind at all times, and the wind changes. So you can't know anything. You know, I worked with a wonderful director called Richard Wilson, who you may know here as an actor as Victor Meldrew, if that series came out here. But anyway, he's a big star in England, but he's also a wonderful theatre director. The only word he ever used on a really regular basis directing is about openness. And that's something you can almost taste if somebody's being truly open. And it's something I look for as a director too. I don't know whether that's attitude or background or training, or how much preparation you've done, but somehow it all arrives at that word. Sometimes it's about selfishness. It depends on the character you're playing. You know, it can't be passive. You know, there's a kind of active nature to being open and a readiness. It's not sitting back. Generosity is part of it, but making a gift of yourself is quite an active thing to do and quite a challenging thing to do to your fellow actor or to the audience. It's not a safe place to be at all. Well, unfortunately, I don't think you can have an accurate screenplay, a screenplay credit, which should read screenplay by Alison Deegan, interfered with by Alan Rickman and Jeremy Brock. That would be more accurate, and that's the truth. You know, Alice, it is her first screenplay, and somewhere along the line, in the way of things, it kind of needed a couple of structural engineers, I suppose, and people with an eye on the budget. But it landed through my letterbox one day, all 180 pages of it, and as I've talked about this before, so I'm not being disloyal to her, Alison is dyslexic, so it was 180 pages of a script with almost no punctuation, except a comma after every 3 words. So, you know, it took a while to read it, but I kind of, like all good scripts, you're hooked by about page 4. I think somebody's probably said this is a classic way of knowing that it's a film you're going to be involved in. You keep turning the pages. And She's extremely Irish, and I knew her and know her husband quite well, who's Sebastian Barry, who's a wonderful novelist and playwright. And so writing's absolutely in the household. And I think what happened was once her kids were kind of grown up, she thought, well, I'm not acting at the moment, and I'm just going to sit down and write. And she really knows her stuff about the court of Louis XIV. So not only did it have a kind of veracity to it, and also a real beauty to the language, because it's slightly off the ground, you know, in the same way as Beckett is Beckett, partly because he's Irish, or maybe largely because he's Irish. There's a use of English that is very special. But also because she'd taken a period of history that we all think we know something about, and or at least we have preconceptions. I'm sure most of you know this, but you know, okay, there's a Louis XIV, there's a Versailles, there's a Le Notre who designed the gardens. There absolutely is not a woman landscape gardener. And this, in many ways, is Alison's point. Why not? And where are the modern parallels to a situation of a male-dominated world where a woman would not and could not have had a profession like that? There were women were cooking, cleaning, sewing at one level of society, or standing about looking gorgeous at the other level of society and getting dumped as soon as they weren't quite so gorgeous anymore. So, and I really admired the way she'd made a real world that was half fantasy, half reality. Well, it was never my idea to play the part. That much is true. It became a kind of economic necessity, and anybody that knows anything about, you know, there's one actor there that didn't have to be paid on the call sheet. So once I'd accepted it, or been pushed into it by the producers, you're grateful for the fact that he's not in every scene. And it is true to say that at some point I thought, well, actually, you know, there's something here that makes it a little less difficult than it might be, which is whatever is the look in the eye of a director on the set, you know, ever watchful and seeing everything, is probably useful for Louis XIV. But there the resemblance ends, because because I am an actor, I approach the film set and my fellow actors as a much more democratic process than perhaps a despot or a Deus Ex Machina or a Sun King might. So yeah, I hope that I'm certainly aware of the fact that somebody said to me this, that, you know, making a film is like going to war, and it's sort of true. And you are the head of the cavalry, but you know, you look behind you and there's this fantastic infantry. And the great thing about a film crew is that they're all experts. They all know so much about their jobs, and none of them ever challenge you. Almost to a fault, really, because I had to say to the first AD, Jack Ravenscroft, I said, if you ever see me about to make a really dumb decision, you must tell me. And I think he found it really difficult to do that, because not in their DNA at all. So Stanley he's a good friend, and we'd worked together before, and he just kept insisting on wanting to read it. So, and so in the end, you know, I don't know, an instinct or something lands with everybody. With Kate, it was really about that when we were ready to shoot the film and we'd sort of got the finance and we'd steered ourselves towards a starting point. And it had taken a few years because I wasn't free to direct a film. Certainly when I started, she wasn't the right age to play it. You know, you've got to have somebody in their mid to late 30s to play that part. And so serendipity meant that when we were all ready, she was the right age. And then Matthias arrived on the scene with Rust and Bone, and it's a tough balancing act, Kate's energy, and in this film specifically because she's playing a strong, independent woman, and it allows her, and I hope she won't mind this, to play the masculine side that she has, and that's a strength of hers. It was a question, as far as I was concerned, of finding an actor who's not afraid to play his feminine side, and then I think that becomes sexy, and that he's patient, and that she's got a huge backlog of past life to unload before they can come together, and he's got to come to terms with that. It's very difficult to find that. And then again, I think it's serendipity. In fact, I was filming in Belgium, and his name had been mentioned, and I'd seen Rust and Bone. He's wonderful in it. If you haven't seen that film, it's a wonderful film. And I thought, well, yeah, but he's Belgian. This is not going to work. These people are all French, but they're going to be speaking English. There's got to be some continuity here. So, I mean, I knew Stanley could do it with a bit of hammering over the head. But
and a bit of ham, too.
So thank God for something I never normally go near called social media. And I hit YouTube, Matthias Skernetz, and there he was in LA giving an interview in perfect English about Rust and Bone, but with an American accent. So we just had to iron that out.
Yeah, it works.
So I don't know, it's somewhere in there, you just kind of felt, you say, okay, Stanley, come on, let's do it. And it was great that it had that sort of somewhat anarchic energy coming in. There is a whole film to be made about that character, and Stanley is one of the people who lost quite a bit of material along the way. If you look at paintings of Monsieur, as he's called, often he's wearing a dress. And what his wife, he and his wife did have like 4 kids, and he was a great fighter at war, although the line that's been cut from the film, sadly, is his wife saying, but he arrives a bit late because he has a lot of... I don't know. I've directed 2 films. They happen both to have been written by women. I didn't write either of them. As I say, I interfered with the second one. I probably interfered quite a bit with the first one, but it's largely circumstance, and probably what I'm as interested in, if I think about it objectively, is removing the rule book about relationships between men and women. I think one of the things that's the guiding lines to me of this film are at the end when a woman says, "What about us?" and a man says, "We will shape each other." These are hard won, these thoughts and feelings between men and women in a world that has stereotypes thrown at us every day. And indeed the scene with the women, they have to be locked away in a room of their own before they can talk about real stuff. The rest of the time they move like an army in front of a wall of men and then fall to the floor. I don't find, as a man, people say it's a feminist film. Yes, it is, although that word to me is just common sense. You'll have a more interesting life if things are more equal. There are, maybe it's partly to do with being an actor. My life is constantly, I've spent my life as an actor opposite people like Kate Winslet, Emma Thompson, Harriet Walter, Juliet Stevenson. These are not weak souls. But they're fascinating people. Oh, she remembered the answer to the second one. I don't think there's music while people are speaking, no. Not that that would be conscious, but no, I think the music is there to be underneath the film at all times. I went to a ballet. There's a small theatre in London called the Print Room, and it's just moved its venue, but then it was in a very small place in West London with, you could only seat about 50 people. And very brave and adventurous ballet was being done where water was pouring on the dancers from the ceiling. And we were all given plastic macs to watch this ballet because we're so close to the dancers. But and whilst trying not to get wet, I was also thinking, this music's extraordinary because there's something about it that is of water. And not that this film is about water, but I always knew that water was going to have something to do with the fountain, obviously. And also, it was the most unegocentric composing because the music was utterly supportive of what the dancers were doing. And anyway, another instinct, really. I'm a great believer in this thing of nobody ever became famous till somebody gave them an opportunity. So a friend of mine had lit this ballet, and I rang him up and said, can you put me in touch with the composer, please? And we met. And I think after about half an hour, I said, do you want to compose this film?
Wow.
And so fast forward to this actually very moving moment for me at a huge recording studio in London, watching him pick up his baton and tap it, and with great control and calm, have the orchestra play the score. And to answer the other part of your question, it was composed during and after. The good thing about he was only 26 at the time. He's 28 years old now. He was there all the time.
Wow, it's very
He was on
impressive.
the set. He breathed the film in. He maintains a kind of wonderful, benign smile almost all the time, even when I'm saying to him, that's horrible, that piece of music.